So the question becomes, if Somalis never left, how did foreign blood find its way back in before history even began? To answer that, we have to rewind time. Not a few centuries, not even a few millennia, but tens of thousands of years back to a world untouched by cities, kings, or names. Long before Mesopotamia carved its tablets, before Egypt raised its first obelisk, humans were already walking the Horn of Africa. In the southern Omo Valley of Ethiopia, just across Somalia's western flank, scientists unearthed the Omo Kaibish remains, 195,000 years old, the oldest known Homo sapiens on Earth. And 35,000 years later, near the middle of the Awash Valley, the Herto man lived and died, one of the earliest anatomically modern humans. His bones, nearly 160,000 years old, show cut marks not from violence, but careful preparation, a kind of early burial ritual, perhaps even reverence. This land wasn't just a passage. It was home, a hearth for humanity. And the evidence didn't vanish with time. It lives on in the Somali genome. Today, the dominant paternal lineage in Somali men is haplogroup E1b1b, more specifically the EV32 subclade. It's not just prevalent, it's overwhelming. Over 77% of Somali males carry it. According to forensic studies from 2005, this branch of EM35 likely originated in the Horn. It's a lineage that once spread northward into Egypt and the Levant before history began to notice. But the maternal side holds something even deeper. Mitochondrial DNA passed from mother to child tells us another story. Somali women carry a high frequency of haplogroup L3. And this is the twist because L3 is the direct ancestor of all non-African mitochondrial lineages. M and N, the haplogroups that built Europe, Asia, and the Americas, all trace back to her. She lived here in the Horn around 65,000 to 70,000 years ago. That means Somali DNA isn't just African, it's pre-global. It carries the code of the humans who walked out of Africa and changed the world. And yet, despite this ancient legacy, despite being a living genetic bridge between continents, Somali history remains erased from most narratives. No pharaohs, no marble ruins, no textbooks, just bloodlines and buried bones. But here's the fracture in the story, the contradiction hiding in plain sight. Somali genomes are unmistakably African, but they're also marked by something older than the Silk Road, older than Islam, older even than agriculture. A strange Eurasian signal, diverged from the rest of the world more than 23,000 years ago, has been found in Somali DNA. So where did it come from? Not from Arab traders, not from Egyptian priests, but from a group of ancient strangers who crossed into Africa long before anyone thought they could. And if those outsiders made it here, what exactly were they bringing with them? Not swords, not trade, not language, but something even more permanent, something far harder to erase, a signal. Around 23,000 years ago, during the icy grip of the last glacial maximum, something happened, a shift, a movement. A pulse of humanity flowed back into Africa before agriculture, before farming even existed in the Levant. Their trail doesn't appear in stone or script, but their DNA is still alive, still detectable in the bones of present-day Somalis. Genome-wide studies, including the pivotal Hodgson et al., 2014, cracked open the story. Somalis, along with other Horn populations, carry a genetic signal no one expected. A West Eurasian ancestry that diverged from other non-Africans more than 20,000 years ago. They called it the Ethio-Somali component because it's unique to this region. Absent from Arabia, absent from Europe, present only in populations like the Somalis, Oromo, Afar, and no one else. This wasn't the Bronze Age. This wasn't Arab-Islamic contact. This was Paleolithic, a time before the cow had ever been domesticated. And we know this because while Arabs carry the Middle Eastern lactase persistence gene, the T13910 variant evolved around 4,000 years ago, Somalis do not. Instead, they developed their own lactase mutation, the C1410 allele, from an independent pastoral revolution thousands of years later. That means the Eurasian signal in Somali DNA entered before agriculture and before any known pastoralist expansion. It came with hunter-gatherers, Possibly epipaleolithic foragers from the Red Sea coast or early Levantine deserts migrating into the Horn just as the Ice Age thawed and new lands opened. They didn't conquer, they blended. And here's what defies logic, what rewrites the rules. That genetic mixture, that collision of ancient African and prehistoric Eurasian, should have produced chaos, variance, divergence. But instead, it created unity. Over the next 10,000 years, this fused ancestry didn't split, it solidified. It became one of the most genetically homogeneous profiles in the world. Modern Somalis from Mogadishu to Hargeisa carry nearly identical ratios of this African-Eurasian ancestry blend. A forensic study even found that over 70% of Somali Y chromosome lineages share a single cluster of markers, the rare E3b1 cluster gamma, now known as EV32. Which begs the question, how did a prehistoric fusion, one that began before agriculture, give rise to a genome so unified, so stable that even 20,000 years later, it's still echoing through the clans of Somalia? Who were the men who passed down that dominant Y chromosome? And what new power did they carry when they began herding their animals across the red sands of Lost Geel? Something shifted, not just in the land, but in the blood. Somewhere between 5,000 and 3,000 BC, as the rest of the world was still planting its first fields, the Horn of Africa became a kingdom of cattle. And what they carried may have redrawn the boundaries of ancient Africa forever. Because while pastoral dynasties ruled inland, a different force was rising at the edge of the sea, one powerful enough to attract the attention of pharaohs. The Land of Punt and Egyptian echoes. Around 1500 BC, the ships of Egypt's 18th dynasty launched into the Red Sea. Not in war, but in awe. Their destination was a place so mysterious, so mythic, the Egyptians called it the Land of the Gods, Punt. It wasn't a kingdom of pharaohs or pyramids, but one of scent, skin, and spice, myrrh, frankincense, living baboons, gold, ebony, ivory, exotic animals led by dark-skinned chiefs, wearing feathers and beads, their faces painted on the walls of Hatshepsut's temple in Deir el-Bahari. Look closely. The Puntites don't resemble Nubians or Libyans. They look like something else, something unmistakably familiar. Their features, their posture match those still seen across Somalia today. And in 2020, science caught up with myth. A team of researchers traced the origins of mummified baboons found in New Kingdom tombs, not by appearance, but by isotopes in their teeth. And the results were clear. These animals came from the Horn of Africa, from coastal Somalia and Eritrea. The land of incense was real, which means Egypt wasn't just looking south. It was reaching south into a thriving world already connected by sea and blood and memory, and perhaps into family. Because while trade moved spices and animals, genetics may have moved too. Minor traces of haplogroup M1 and U6 lineages, often found in ancient Egyptian remains, appear today in Somali maternal lines. Small, yes, but real, possibly carried along trade winds or tucked into the wombs of Puntite daughters sent north with their perfumes and gods. But that raises a question far deeper than trade routes. If these two worlds exchange more than goods, if the Horn gave birth to Punt and Punt stood face to face with Pharaoh, could Egypt and Somalia share a common ancestor? Could their bloodlines once have been one? Could Egypt and Somalia share a bloodline older than the pharaohs? Because everything they built, pyramids, dynasties, hieroglyphs, might trace back to whispers here in the Horn. In 2003, geneticist Ehud Weiss stunned the field by identifying Y-DNA AM35, the father root of both Egypt's ancient rulers and Somali clans. But it wasn't the same branch. In Egypt, it's EV68, or its subclade EV78. In Somalia, it's EV32. Two siblings with a shared parent born in eastern Africa, not along the Nile. This isn't conjecture. Ancient mummies from pre-dynastic Egypt dating to around 3,500 BC carry Y, M78. Meanwhile, nearly 80% of Somali men today carry V32. According to 23andMe population genetic surveys, it means the Horn may have given birth to the man who founded the pharaoh's lineage. And the maternal story runs just as deep. Mitochondrial haplogroup M1, a rare sub-Saharan marker, cropped up in Egyptian remains as early as 3300 BC. Somali women also carry rare subtypes of L3 variants found in Neolithic Egyptian tombs, suggesting bidirectional gene flow. This isn't trade-touch DNA. It's a shared ancestral pool. But how would genetics follow history? Through language. Enter Afro-Asiatic, a linguistic family linking Somali, ancient Egyptian, ancient Cushitic tongues, and even the early Semitic languages. Linguist Christopher Ehret places its cradle in the Nile Horn corridor around 6000 BC, long before Mesopotamia. So, the civilization we've always worshipped, Egypt, might not have been the origin story after all. It may have been the offspring. As pharaohs carved their names in stone, elements of their earliest paternal and maternal lineages may have drifted from here, south of the Red Sea. Culture built north, but genes flowed north to south. Now, this genetic current didn't end with the pharaohs. It deepened because while Egypt shaped the world in stone, the Horn was quietly shaping the genome of a people who would outlast empires. And soon another wave would wash over that bloodline. Not from the Nile, not from the Sahara, but from the sea. Ancient mariners and the coming of Islam. Sometime in the first millennium BC, long before Islam, long before the rise of Mecca, ships began arriving along the Horn's jagged coast, carved wooden hulls, sails thick with incense. Their language, Old South Arabian, their homeland Saba, the ancient kingdom of Sheba. They brought trade, spices, architecture, stone inscriptions etched in Sabaean script, still visible today in ruins like Ozan or Haga, depending on the specific site, a crumbling ancient port on the northern Somali coast. But they left something else behind, inside the DNA of modern Somalis. Roughly 10% of Y chromosomes carry a quiet marker, haplogroup T, specifically T, M184, a genetic signature once common in ancient Yemen and Arabia Felix. It didn't come with war. It came with commerce and maybe with marriage. But the mystery runs deeper because while Sabaean builders shaped the coastline, erecting temples, warehouses, and watchtowers, the Somali soul remained untouched. The language stayed Cushitic. The faith remained traditional. The genome absorbed a trickle of T, M184, but the tongue never turned Semitic. A contradiction touched, but not transformed. These Arabian men, their genetic trail points to around 150 BC, aligning with the Red Sea's golden age of maritime trade. Rome to India, Egypt to Aksum, and Somalia at the very center. So while the inland pastoralists ruled the land with EV32, a new class was forming by the shore. Merchants, sailors, perhaps priests carrying T lineages from across the sea. It was a quiet merging, no conquest, just contact. But the balance wouldn't last because just a few centuries later, a new storm arrived. Not from trade, not from bloodlines, but from belief. A revelation that would rewrite identity. Not just in Somalia, but across the entire Indian Ocean rim. Islam was coming. But would it rewrite the Somali genome too? And while the mosques of Mogadishu rose into the sky, the EV32 lineage remained untouched beneath the skin. Because Islam came swept in with belief, but not with blood. From the 7th century CE, merchants and scholars arrived on Somali shores, Zila, Berbera, Mogadishu, all steeped in Islam by the 9th century during the Islamic Golden Age, known for trade networks stretching from Baghdad to Guangzhou. By 1000 CE, Somali port cities were hubs of faith and commerce, their mosques echoing with calls to prayer. Yet, when geneticists looked deeper, they found the story hadn't changed as much as you'd expect. Clan oral traditions, especially among the Darid and Isaac, speak of Arab sheiks arriving in the 9th or 10th century, descendants of the Prophet Muhammad. Those names became lineages woven into Somali identity, but DNA doesn't lie. Y chromosome haplogroup J1, the classic marker of Arab paternal ancestry, shows up in just about 3% of Somali males. According to population genetics surveys conducted in the early 2000s, it's a trace, a whisper, not a tide. Contrast that with 77 to 81% carrying the ancient EV32 lineage. And the picture sharpens. Islam reshaped culture but didn't wash away genes. Visualize this. Mogadishu's medieval mosques, built with coral and plaster, lined the Indian Ocean shore as travelers from Cairo and Aden walked in. Arabic script replaced Sabaean inscriptions. Islamic law reshaped clan customs. But beneath the surface, the heartbeat stayed the same. Ancient Cushitic roots, forged in the Horn tens of thousands of years ago, held strong. The tension here is profound. One of the world's most influential religious movements met with a society rooted in a single dominant genome. Identity was remade not by conquest, not by mass intermarriage, but by belief. And yet this was not the last arrival, because after Islam, another group came, not bearing faith or flags, but chains. They brought an identity that would fracture the Somali genome in a way no religion could. Their story is the hardest to tell because, unlike the Arabs, they didn't arrive by sail, but by chains. The legacy of slavery and genetic cohesion. By the 19th century, the Indian Ocean slave trade had carved its way into East Africa. Caravans snaked inland from Zanzibar. Dhows cut across turquoise waters, filled not with merchants, but with the stolen. Tens of thousands of Bantu-speaking people taken from Tanzania, Mozambique, and Malawi were brought north into southern Somalia, not as traders, not as missionaries, but as slaves. And yet their bodies stayed. The children stayed, but their DNA remained unmistakably foreign. Modern genetic studies reveal the divide with painful clarity. Somali Bantus carry the Y chromosome haplogroup E1b1a, the marker of West and Central African paternal lines. Their maternal DNA often belongs to L2 and L0 branches, nearly absent in native Somali populations, who instead hold high frequencies of L3 and EV32. Two groups, two genetic worlds, one geography. Even after abolition, the divide remained. Intermarriage was rare. Social structures kept the lines sharp. Somali identity, fiercely clan-based, resisted full fusion. The gene pool remarkably, stubbornly stayed homogeneous. So now comes the deepest tension. What does it mean to belong? To speak the same language, live on the same land, follow the same religion, and yet be told your blood disqualifies you? Because the Somali Bantus are Somali in culture, but not in genome. And across generations, the memory of arrival, of being brought, not born, shaped not just identity but inheritance. Even today, the distinction lingers in surnames, in social standing, and in DNA samples decades later, still carrying the echoes of a forced migration. But if all these genetic layers, Cushitic, Eurasian, Sabaean, Arab, and Bantu, touch Somalis, why is the Somali genome still so remarkably unified? How did it resist fragmentation? And what secret does that genetic cohesion still hide beneath the surface? Buried within that tightly guarded code lies a signal so strange. It doesn't match any human civilization. It's a fragment of deep time, older than Arabia, older than Egypt, possibly from the first chapter of human history. Because here's what science found. Over 70% of Somali men share not just a haplogroup, EV32, but nearly identical YSDR markers. A forensic study from 2005 labeled it the E3b1 cluster gamma. It's a genetic bottleneck so extreme, only seen in island populations like the Faroe Islands or remote tribal groups. But Somalia wasn't remote. Trade routes crisscrossed the Gulf of Aden. Empires rose and fell. Slaves came. Islam arrived. And yet, through all this, the Somali male genome barely budged. How? Through centuries of clan-based endogamy. Somali social structure is kinship with iron rules, patrilineal, strict lineage tracing, exogamous only in rare alliances. The gene pool stayed local. This social gatekeeping fossilized ancient admixture from 23,000-year-old Eurasian strands to Cushitic pastoralist blood, soaked in Los Gil's rock art, into an unbreakable genetic core. By the 16th century, Portuguese explorers noted a uniform physique along the Somali coast, despite linguistic and cultural diversity in the land. That anecdote aligns with genetic homogeneity confirmed by modern studies, showing a haplotype diversity of just 0.957 compared to 0.99 in Europe. This was isolation. It was a social fortress, clan code stronger than borders, kingdoms, or religions. But here's where the mystery goes nuclear. Within that fortress, a single faint genetic signal remains. It doesn't trace to Punt. It doesn't connect to Arabia. It isn't Neolithic or Islamic. It whispers of something else. something predating all known migrations, a signal older than the desert sands, older than the ancient Nile civilizations, a signature of an origin we've only just begun to recognize. And it begs the question, what if the true story of Somali DNA lies not in their arrivals, but in the echoes of people who left behind no history? People whose footsteps vanished into prehistory, yet whose blood courses through millions even now. The signal waits, and the answer will change everything. The Neanderthal connection and linguistic echoes. Because buried deep in the Somali genome, beneath the layers of pastoralism, trade, conquest, and clan, lies a whisper from another species, Neanderthal. It's faint, just under 1%, but it's there in nearly every Somali DNA sample studied in recent years. And that is impossible to explain without leaving Africa. You see, Neanderthals never walked the Horn. They never set foot south of the Sinai. Their bones lie in Europe and Western Asia. Their caves stretch from Spain to Uzbekistan. But in Africa, nothing. So, how did the DNA get here? Only one answer fits. Somali ancestors didn't just stay. They left around 50,000 to 70,000 years ago. A group of early humans crossed the Red Sea, possibly from the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and entered Paleolithic Eurasia. They survived ice ages, climbed mountains, lived alongside Neanderthals, and somewhere between firelight and fear, they interbred. Then, long before pharaohs, before farming, they came back. The backflow is real. Studies like Hodgson et al., 2014, show a unique Eurasian component in the Somali genome diverged from the Near East over 23,000 years ago, and with it came the echo of roughly 0.8% Neanderthal DNA, invisible in most sub-Saharan Africans, which remains in Somali genomes. It is not from Arabia. It is not colonial. It is prehistoric, which means the Somali body holds the memory of two worlds, the savanna and the snow, the cradle of humanity and the edge of extinction. But it also raises a deeper question. If the genome remembers all this, the migrations, the unions, the climates, then what else does it remember? Not just blood, but thought. Because the next trace isn't biological, it's linguistic. And if Somali DNA carries the voice of Neanderthals, could it also carry the first language ever spoken? Because Somali is more than just a language. It's a living time capsule, a branch of Afro-Asiatic that links us to hieroglyphs on limestone, to Proto-Hebrew chants, even to the Sumerian seals of 3000 BC. Its roots go back at least 8,000 years, to a community speaking before writing existed, before monuments, before empires made history. The bigger revelation, the genome echoes the grammar. Genetic surveys from Eritrea's linguistic genetics to the ancient DNA labs of 2022 show populations speaking Afro-Asiatic share, a unique blend of deeply African lineages, like L3 and V32 mingled with West Asian backflow from 23,000 years ago, and none carry that mix as cleanly as Somali DNA. Here, the genetic ratio mirrors the linguistic tree in the Horn around 6000 BC, when Afro-Asiatic likely diverged. Somali plateaus saw this fusion take hold, and the mutations that defined Somali lactase persistence. 2500 BC, or the Neolithic wave of 4000 BC, coincide with language shift patterns seen in oral poetry and clan lore recorded in the 15th century. Gibber Maxim. It's not merely coincidence. The hypothesis, language and genes co-evolved. Picture this. Prehistoric herders carrying both EV32 and an early Afro-Asiatic tongue, camping under Los Guil's painted bulls, teaching their offspring not only to milk cattle, but to speak in patterns that echo ancient Near Eastern rhythms. As the centuries passed, pharaohs rose and fell. The Sabaean trade thrived around the 1st century BC, and Islam reshaped identity. The Somali tongue endured, its structure anchored by ancestry, its cadence shaped by migration. So when we trace the roots of Egyptian, Hebrew, Arabic, even Berber, we might be tracing the stepchildren of that ancient Somali-speaking tribe. In Somali blood, we're not just reading genetics. We're reading a Rosetta Stone, a cipher encoded in gene and grammar. It could be the single living link from migratory nomads, through Afro-Asiatic divergence, to the first sparks of writing on papyrus. If Somali DNA truly bridges Africa and Asia, could it also bridge silence to the first voice of civilization? Because somewhere in that code lies the beginning of us.